Everyone, Empress Justice here. I wanted to talk about the recent rise of the far right and like my assessment of why it's happening within the context of my own experiences, chiefly as a targeted individual. But before I get into that, I have to get into the political climate first. The far right have been mobilizing and have been on the rise, but truthfully, a lot of people are acting as if the far right suddenly decided to jump up and start being violent against people. No, I was there when the Truther movement was just really kicking off and gaining ground, and this was back in university. There were all kinds of groups basically exposing governmental corruption, but it was often used as an alt-right pipeline. So along with exposing governmental corruption, there was also anti-Semitism, the denial of the Holocaust, the sympathizing with Nazism. It was all there. I saw it all happen. I saw it all unfold. And what ended up happening was the exposure of the government and the rise of the far right. It became like this. It became intertwined. So the exposure of systemic racism of our government, the exposure of using vulnerable members of the public for psychological and electronic experimentation, things of that nature, using vulnerable people for trafficking and bigotry. And then came these far right groups to swoop in and say, we're listening to you, we're hearing your concerns. So they're not just jumping up and saying, we hate darkies and all that kind of thing. Trigger warning, sorry. But like it did us, white folk and middle class people of color. It cannot be stated enough. There were middle class people of color, like people like, people like my grandparents. Well, not people like my grandparents, but people of my grandparents' generation who came here on Windrush, who were actually citizens of the country. They were just citizens of the Commonwealth. So we had citizens of the Commonwealth who were feeling disillusioned, who had grown to middle class status. A lot of them had grown to middle class status, became homeowners. And then you had, and business owners. And then you had working class whites. So there were all these people who were feeling disillusioned and feeling like they weren't being listened to. And the far right basically swooped them up and said, we're hearing you, we're listening to you, we hear your concerns. And that is exactly what gave them legitimacy, because the far right incorporated a truther movement that was actually exposing systemic racism within the context of exposing governmental corruption, undercover trafficking that the government was engaging in, the experimentation with psychotropic weapons. I think it's psychotropic or psychotronic weaponry, frequency weaponry, EMFs, DEWs, all that type of stuff. So all of this and the systemic racism that was behind the government corruption, it was intermingled with alt-right talking points that disillusioned people of privilege were only too happy to embrace. Fast forward, and now we have a situation where that leads me to the second point I want to make. It's not just middle class people of color and black people. It's not just middle class black people and people of color and working class whites that weren't being listened to. It was also people who are mentally ill and mentally vulnerable that weren't being listened to, because we tried to tell you that the government were actually experimenting with us to figure out how to manipulate the rest of you. And now everything that they've been plotting has been coming to pass. I remember I went to a protest with my dad, and there was actually an informal agent there. It doesn't matter where you go. You can go to a protest. There will be an informal agent sent there to track you, at the very least, if not cause a sabotage within the protest. Okay? So it's not me. It's not just me being gang stalked. It's not just a handful of us being gang stalked. That's not the only reason why the gang stalkers are there. They're also there to cause upset within protests. They're also there to cause upset within protests, to infiltrate protests, to gain information, come back out at the very least. At the most, they are there to set shit off. Okay? Now, mentally vulnerable people tried to warn you, people on the fringes tried to warn you repeatedly that this was going to happen because there were people who are vulnerable being experimented on first. So that was another group of people that wasn't being listened to, and that's why we have what we have. And among those people are targeted individuals, people who are actually selected for psychological warfare experimentation and electronic warfare experimentation. The same type of warfare that's being used on the public en masse. I don't know if you've seen Kingsman, but there are frequency weapons that are being turned up to the maximum to change people's moods in that movie. Those technologies are real. They have patents. Do you understand what I'm saying? They have patents. Those weapons have been experimented with, and they've been elevating people's anger to the point where the hope is to incite violence. Fatal violence, so much the better, because fatal violence can be used to tug the emotions of the public and to get them to act out like they're acting out now. And once they're acting out, you can turn up the frequency a little bit more, get people even angrier, get people committing violent acts, get people scared. There was this one video that I saw of an attack in Hull where somebody was in a car. I think they were a non-white person. It was most likely a brown person rather than a black person because it was in Hull. But there was somebody in a BMW, and there were crowds of white fascists basically crowding the car. One of them got in the car and they started stabbing the guy. I don't know if he's alive or not. But all of this was right in front of your eyes, unfolding right in front of you, and the signs were there and the warning signs were there. So the first group of people you didn't listen to were working class white people and middle class black people and people of color, because they felt disillusioned and they were not listened to. The second group of people were mentally vulnerable people, because they tried to tell you something wasn't right with the mental health system, and that became a henchman for the program that I'm talking about. The second group of people you didn't listen to. The third group of people you didn't listen to were targeted individuals who are among the mentally vulnerable, who tried to warn you what was going on and how everything was unfolding and how people were being used, and you still refuse to listen. And now we're in this situation where it doesn't matter which protest you go to. I could go to a protest right now. I guarantee you there will be at least one who is there to observe me and not be part of the cause. I can guarantee you there will be at least one saboteur within that crowd that is there to instigate shit so that it can descend into violence. They can send informal agents to track you, but they can also infiltrate protests to sabotage the protest so that it can descend into violence and endanger you at the same time. Kill two birds with one stone. Gang stalking is not just to stalk a singular person. It can also be used, they can also be used by lobbyists to set violence off in protest groups. Now, when it comes to my story as a targeted individual, I am not going to hold you guys. I'm being phased out. I'm being phased out by people who allegedly are supposed to be on my side. I'm being phased out by them because they, I don't know what the reasons are. I can only speculate. But ever since I started talking about EEG, which I talked about in the Mother of Dragons reading that I did, when I started talking about that, that's when suddenly people didn't want me posting my tarot readings on WhatsApp groups, or suddenly my money is being affected because people don't want to hear the truth about what's going on and have the opportunity to actually do something about it. They rather stick their heads in the sand. And now it's getting to a point where specific groups are going to protests and being outnumbered, which is a dangerous warning sign. There are groups going to protest and being outnumbered, all because people refuse to listen to what is actually going on. We've had ex-MI5 agents warning you what was going on, ex-SIS agents warning you what's going on, ex-NSA, CIA warning us what's going on, paying for it with their lives, and we still didn't listen. Fourth group we didn't listen to, the agents themselves. I spoke to Barry Trower, who worked in the Navy, but he also worked with MI5 as well, like whilst he was working in the Navy, and he was working on these microwave weapons that I'm talking about. One of the uses that he had for it was to attack a Northern Irish group in Belfast. Now, if he was willing to attack a Northern Irish group, do you seriously think that black activists wouldn't be attacked with that same technology? Think about Olive Morris and how she died. Think about Bob Marley and how he died. Do you seriously think that they would just stop at Northern Irish people, knowing how demonized black people were when we first came over to Britain? The MI5 actually released, I think it was propaganda saying that targeting black people was targeting communism, because communism was the great big boogeyman, and any person of color was seen basically as one step closer to communism. That's how the US reinforced apartheid, and that's how the UK informally enforced apartheid. There ain't no way they're going to spy on black people and not have microwave weapons being used on at least one of our families. There's just no fucking way. And now everything's unfolding. We have saboteurs in protest groups. Again, let me go to Pride. Let me go to an anti-racist protest. Let me go to Pride. There will be at least one person in Pride sent to spy on me or to sabotage Pride in some way. Okay, let me go to an anti-racist protest. There will be at least one person spying. I went to the tribute for Chris Kaba. There was a gang stalker who came towards me wearing a backpack, walked off before anybody could see him. Before anybody else could see him, he walked off. And he was one of the quiet ones. He was one of the ones who didn't start shit. There will be people who are tracking and observing you, and then there will be people who are sent in to start shit. They will be, if I show up at those protests, the people doing the tracking and reporting will be at those protests. The people doing the sabotaging will also be at those protests. And if you think that has nothing to do with what's going on with the far right and black people and people of color being targeted, you're naive. This is why, even though I'm being phased out right now, it doesn't really hurt my feelings, because at the end of the day, I know that I'm actually prepared for what's happening. I'm prepared for what's going on. I've been prepared for decades now. So I'm not surprised by any of this. The only thing that I'm worried about is that because I'm on my own, I'm worried about how that could affect me, especially if my community are deliberately trying to phase me out by playing mind games. And I know at least 2 people within my community who are gang stalkers, working for the same people that are causing this destabilization in the country right now. Because like I said, psychological warfare and electronic warfare, these things have to be bought, especially the electronic arsenal, the directed energy weapons, the frequency weapons. Do you understand? There's an arms race for these things. And also there's satellite space being fought for right now. On top of that, there's a huge transition of power happening. That's why all this shit is taking place. Austerity, Brexit, Ukraine versus Russia, Israel versus Palestine. All of this is gearing up towards a transition of power that is happening right now. And in order for that transition of power to go relatively smoothly, the population has to be thinned everywhere. Especially in countries that are no longer as powerful as they once were. In order to do that, you've got to bring the 4 horsemen in. You've got to bring the illness element in through 1-9. You've got to bring the illness element in through 1-9, the famine element in through austerity and Brexit, the war element in, ordinary war, through Russia versus Ukraine and Israel versus Palestine. You've got to bring in the civil war, the far right movement over here in the UK and in the US as well. Even though it's it's kind of toothless in the US at the moment, due to Donald Trump's stupidity. The far right in the West, that's an example of civil war. So the four horsemen have been riding strong, boy. And all of this is because of a transition of power. In order for that transition of power to happen smoothly, there has to be a thinning of the populations. And the reason why people are not dealing with it is because it's not comfortable. How comfortable do you have to be before you actually fucking do something? Do the bombs have to drop? What? What is it going to take to wake people up to the fact that gang stalking is responsible for many of the political struggles that we have now, many of the deaths that we've observed? Gang stalking is responsible for much of it because it's been facilitating division. Gang stalking weaponizes racism, it weaponizes transphobia, it weaponizes homophobia. The military have got the 77th Brigade. And I believe that every country on the planet has a brigade like that, where it's specifically targeted towards internet arguments, forming people's opinions via the internet. They're like, we're basically covered from all sides. You have no idea how deep this shit is. You have no idea how deep this shit is. There's a war for information, for satellite space, for weapons. And there are certain organizations, no, not organizations, there are certain nations that are more powerful than others, which is why this transition is happening. But in order for it to happen, a lot of blood has to be shed. And like I said, targeted individuals have been trying to warn people. Like all the people that I've been talking about up until now have tried to warn everyone. And coming back to the original subject that I talked about earlier, people in my community, instead of actually doing something about it, they're trying to phase me out. They've been watching my videos, so they should be asking me questions. They should be trying to solve the situation. Instead, they're trying to phase me out because they're uncomfortable. I'm over here wondering how uncomfortable things have to be before something is done when the fucking bombs drop. How uncomfortable do things have to be when people are in gas chambers again? How uncomfortable does it have to get? Let me know. Let me know how uncomfortable things have to get before things get real. That's why it's difficult for me to feel hurt when my own community does the predictable thing and starts icing me out and starts phasing me out, like through mind games. It's difficult for me to feel hurt by it when I'm just so fucking scared about the violence that could happen to me as somebody who's on her own and the only one that I know actually dealing with reality and talking about it openly. So there's going to be more of this nonsense. There's going to be more phasing out. There's going to be more lying. There's going to be more, hi, how are you? Like, there's going to be more of that. And in the meantime, people are going to keep dying. Anti-racism will continue to be outnumbered. People can keep playing if they want to. This shit is not a game. People have already been slaughtered in unprecedented numbers, and it's about to get worse if people don't wise up now. I will leave as much information about the electronic weaponry as I can. But truth be told, I can't be bothered to post all them fucking links. I will post as many as I can. But in case people don't know, hello, my name is Empress Justice. My real name is Fabienne Deacon. I'm a targeted individual. I've been aware for almost 2 decades now. And what I'm being subjected to, gang stalking, is not a personal thing. It's not a thing that is restricted to people who get on the wrong side of powerful people. vulnerable people have also been caught in the mix for the longest time. And if people are out there thinking that it's something that's only a symptom, or it's a far-right delusion, let me tell you something. The people who are suffering the most are Black people, brown people, women, children, trans people, queer people, physically and mentally vulnerable people, like I've been saying, especially mentally vulnerable people, because of the poor emotional regulation. We're easier to target. So in case of people are thinking that everything that I'm saying is a far-right delusion, understand that I've spoken to one of the top people in this country when it comes to fucking electronic warfare. This shit has been a genocide. And the fact that people are trying to phase me out before anybody can find out the truth about who the saboteurs are, I'm not shocked. I'm not shocked. I'm really not shocked. And I'll reveal more when the time comes. I keep teasing it. But once again, I'm waiting for the drop. Because Empress Justice means Empress Justice. I don't know what everybody else stands for. So. Whew. So, yeah. Yeah. That's the only thing I'm worried about. I'm worried about how far the violence is going to escalate and how TIs are going to be affected. We're going to be especially in danger because we're the ones who have been trying to tell everybody the truth and trying to get the word out. We're the ones I'm worried about. And then they're going to move on to Black and brown people, queer people and trans people. Like I said before, women, they're already trying to supplant women and children as much as possible. Trying to work around child labor laws to get children back into work while fucking education dwindles. It's all there. Reproductive rights going backwards. What do you think all this is for? It's military shit. It's for arms trading. All of this is for arms trading and the trading of technology and the trading of territory. So again, I'm just keeping my eyes open, waiting for the drop so that I can get the fuck out of Dodge if necessary. So I love you guys so much. Peace and blessings. And for those who are into the truth and not afraid of the truth, I salute you. And I can't wait to meet you. Hang on, what's wrong with my eyes? I can't wait to meet you.